Well, Administrator, it's a pleasure to be here with you. We go way back to when Minister Roth was with the Wireline Bureau at the FCC and then Senior Advisor for the Senate Commerce Committee. So now having made or helped participate in making policy, you're now charged with carrying it out. So let's start just by talking a little bit about, for those who don't know, right? The NTIA is kind of a powerhouse agency, but it operates behind the scenes. Can you share with us a little bit about what the NTIA does and what role it plays in the federal government?
Thank you, Professor Lyons, and also just thank you to State of the Net for having me here today. It's an honor to be here. It's also an honor to be in conversation with Professor Lyons, who I completely agree is a thought leader on issues related to telecommunications and tech policy, and is someone whose work I've followed and has been an influence on me in approaching difficult issues of public policy. In terms of NTIA's role, I think that you categorized it in a really thoughtfully. We have an important strategic role, sometimes fly under the radar. I would describe our role in a nutshell as advancing connectivity nationwide, as well as America's technology leadership. And we do that in different ways. We manage federal spectrum and expand opportunities for greater spectrum efficiency. We are charged with administering the $42 billion BEAD program and ensuring broadband connectivity nationwide. We play a role in public safety communications in overseeing FirstNet. And we also, in the international arena, play an important role in tracking and getting involved in international standard setting, which is so critical to America's technology leadership. So I would just say that the NTIA is operating according to these mandates at a pivotal time for America, and it's just such an honor to be serving the president and serving our country at this time.
Great. So you've identified three big priorities as administrator. The first one is commercial spectrum access, which Commissioner Trusty was talking about a little bit before. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act requires NTIA to find 500 megahertz of spectrum for commercial use. Walk us through what that means for the American people, right? How will more commercial spectrum access affect wireless services or innovation or U.S. competitiveness?
Yeah, so spectrum is this invisible but mighty resource that fuels so much of what we consider the defining features of modern life: 5G, 6G networks, Wi-Fi, satellite technology, radars. And so it's so critical that this essential resource be managed effectively, because the opportunity costs of inefficient spectrum are really quite enormous in terms of our economy, in terms of jobs, in terms of our technology leadership. Because it's not just about the networks themselves and exporting our architecture abroad, but also all of the innovation that happens on top of those networks, the apps. We want to make sure that the killer app for 6G is developed here at home, not by our adversaries, because technology leadership, it is becoming so increasingly synonymous with national security. Additionally, the military relies so much on off-the-shelf wireless technology, and that's just another example of why it's so critical that we lead on spectrum and that we're the first mover and that we don't underutilize our spectrum resources. So I think that was something that was recognized by Congress and the president in the One Big Beautiful Bill, and then later in the presidential memorandum on spectrum from last December. We need to increase access to commercial spectrum, especially after the pipeline had run dry over the past few years. We lacked auction authority, we lacked a clear plan for what auctions we were going to have, and the One Big Beautiful Bill restored that auction authority and set the federal government, including NTIA, on clear timelines to identify spectrum for 6G. So we're in charge of identifying 500 megahertz of federal spectrum to be reallocated from federal to commercial licensed full power use. We are full steam ahead on that project. The presidential memorandum that came out last December put us on a strict deadline of identifying spectrum in the 7 gigahertz band by the end of the year, and we're working really hard to meet that deadline. So I've talked a lot about commercial licensed spectrum, but it's also important to recognize that we need an all of the above approach to expanding access to spectrum, not just licensed spectrum, but also unlicensed spectrum. We have all of these low power unlicensed technologies that we rely on day to day, including Wi-Fi, and maintaining our leadership on that technology is really critical. One of the predictions for the future 6G networks is that it's going to be defined increasingly by seamless integration of terrestrial and non-terrestrial networks. So increasing access to spectrum for satellite spectrum is also critical. So we just really need that all of the above approach, and that's what we're pursuing at NTIA.
So on this timeline, the first milestone that you've been charged with hitting is finding 200 megahertz by mid-2027. Can you share with us what progress you've made to date and which bands you're most excited about?
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but as I said, we're all hands on deck working with our federal partners and federal incumbents to meet those deadlines and hopefully beat them if possible. In the fall, we held a spectrum symposium where we announced the bands where we anticipate the pipeline, 500 megahertz pipeline will come from. There's the 7 gigahertz band. The study of that band is further ahead than others. There's already spectrum relocation funds allocated to that band. And per the presidential memorandum, we're tasked with identifying spectrum in that band by the end of the year. We're looking at the 2.7 to 2.9 gigahertz band. We're in the process of securing spectrum relocation funds to complete that study. When you do a study of a federal band, what you're really looking at is how do I ensure that the critical federal missions in that band are going to be able to find a new home? What are the characteristics that we're going to need to meet to ensure that we're able to relocate them or provide different technologies to meet those needs? And so that's really what these studies are all about. And that's why it's so critical to work with federal partners on protecting critical federal needs. We're also looking at the 4 gigahertz band. We think that there's great opportunities in that band for the US to be a leader internationally on that spectrum. There's a lot of commercial interest in that band. There's also a lot of federal incumbents in that band, 15 as I can recall. So that's going to be a bit more of a complicated exercise, but we're also full steam ahead on securing spectrum relocation funds to get that band studied and made available for commercial use. And I forgot, there's one other band. We're also looking at 1675 to 1695. We've actually already identified 5 megahertz between 1675 and 1680 as kind of a down payment on our obligation to identify spectrum. We're also trying to look creatively what opportunities are there. You know, we talk a lot about commercial license use, but potential direct-to-cell use in the 1675 band. So we're looking at all of our options and looking forward to getting to 500 and beyond.
Yeah, I was impressed that you got that first chunk out so quickly. That was really impressive. You mentioned a little bit about unlicensed use. As you look forward to the World Radio Communication Conference in Shanghai, you were really talking about the importance of protecting the 6 gigahertz band for unlicensed use. What's the issue there, and what issues are we facing as the United States from other countries?
Yeah, World Radio Communication Conference is really critical. It's where international spectrum policy is harmonized, and we want to make sure that our interests are advanced at that critical conference, and that means having our positions developed well in advance and ensuring that we work with our partners across the federal government, the State Department, the White House, the FCC, to have a unified U.S. position and rally our allies around our positions. So work is underway. We want to make sure that we go into WRC 27 as a leader, not a follower. You brought up unlicensed use. I think that this gigahertz band was a major issue in the last WRC, and I think that we're trying to learn our lessons from that previous experience and correct where we may have fell short at that previous WRC. We lead the world in Wi-Fi and unlicensed technology. It's an area where the US leads. Other countries have sought to identify that band for different purposes, and so we're working to advance our interest on the 6 gigahertz band and show the world the importance of Wi-Fi for economic growth and for innovation. It's just incredibly strategically important for us. And then back to WRC, the agenda for WRC 27 is actually going to be quite satellite focused. I referenced earlier that one of the projections for 6G networks is that they're going to be defined in many ways by seamless integration of terrestrial and non-terrestrial networks. And given our leadership in satellite communications, it's really critical for our technology leadership that we enter WRC with strong positions and in a leadership capacity.
So your second big initiative is BEAD reform, and I think a lot of people have heard a lot about that. The BEAD program had famously been criticized for having been around for several years and not having wired a single house when you took over. Now, after the benefit of the bargain reforms, you're kind of approving state plans right and left. And you've saved $21 billion. So can you talk a little bit about what wasn't working before and what steps NTIA has taken to kind of shake up the process?
Yeah, thanks. I think that BEAD has been a real success story for the Trump administration. This was a program that was saddled with unlawful, extraneous rules, extreme technology mandates, central planning that drove provider participation away. And so when the Trump administration in June, in issuing the restructuring notice, Secretary Lutnick really restored BEAD to its core statutory mission of ensuring nationwide connectivity. And I think that as the results have shown, we've really delivered on that goal. Thanks to the benefit of the bargain reforms, participation in the program surged, providers that otherwise stayed out under hostile, burdensome rules came to the table that brought down costs. There was increased skin in the game through private matching. That's a feature that we really look to ensure that a project is going to be successful. We've been incredibly careful to ensure that skin in the game exists. We have terms and conditions that are really focused on ensuring that the program succeeds and that BEAD areas are successful, that BEAD projects are successful and don't succumb to defaults, learning lessons from previous broadband programs past. And I think we're really proud of the work that we've been able to achieve. We're proud of the work that the state broadband offices have been able to achieve. They've worked really hard to get their states approved, to get their states over the finish line. And we're really looking forward to seeing America universally connected through BEAD.
And some of those state stories are really amazing. I was just reading about Nevada. The highest cost per location dropped from $228,000 to $25,000. And you saw this huge growth in private match from like 10% to 43%. How did that happen? What were the reforms that really prompted such a revolutionary change?
Yeah, so Nevada is one of the states where we have data comparing what states that were going to be conditionally approved under the Biden administration and plans that were approved under the Trump administration. And those results are really spectacular. Under the Biden administration, the administration was going to approve per location costs that were $228,000 a location. It's just hard to explain that as reasonable to a normal American. $228,000, that's 3 times the state's median income. And Nevada is this incredible story where they saved over $200 million compared to the plan that would have been approved under the previous administration. It also shows just what an opportunity cost that you had under the previous rules. The consequence of the burdensome rules under the previous administration was this $21 billion in opportunity costs. And so thanks to the hard work of the states, thanks to the hard work of providers and increased participation, we're able to deliver this amazing amount of savings for the American people. And we really think it'll pay dividends.
$21 billion is a lot of money.
Yeah.
How are you thinking about how to allocate that?
Well, so again, as I said, just really proud of the achievement of what we were able to accomplish and the states were able to accomplish thanks to the benefit of the bargain reforms. That's the $21 billion question. There are a lot of ideas out there. When we think about the BEAD savings, I think that what NTIA would hope to accomplish is the same principles that made the BEAD program and the benefit of the bargain reform so successful, ensuring that the funds are spent in a manner that's fair to taxpayers, that's non-distortionary, that is non-duplicative, that doesn't invite waste, fraud, and abuse. There are a lot of ideas out there. We're actually holding a listening session on Wednesday. We invite members of the public to share their views and to respond to others' views. We want to get this right because it is such a large amount of money. And so we invite you to come participate and join the conversation.
Great. So the third big pillar of your agenda is protecting kids from excessive screen time. And that's a mantra that's really near and dear to my heart. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what's motivating you in this area. A lot of people are focused about kids having cell phones, but you're just arguing that's just scratching the surface. The real issue is what's going on with school-issued laptops and tablets.
I forgot to say something.
Oh, sure.
Before we get to that topic, I completely blanked. We actually approved 42 states so far. We actually have 8 more states to approve today on BEAD. And so I was hoping to announce them at State of the Net. So very thrilled that we've approved Oregon, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Vermont, Mississippi, New Mexico, Puerto Rico, and U.S. Virgin Islands. Thrilled that we've been able to get these over the finish line and looking forward to completing all 56. One other thing I'll say is that as we get to the end of BEAD, we see certain challenges with states. In one of the cases of the states that we announced today, Pennsylvania, in our rules, we require that states with prevailing wage laws apply those classifications accurately. And in the case of Pennsylvania, broadband workers were being consistently classified as electric linemen, which was driving up costs in the state. So in that state's case, Pennsylvania is going to be required as a condition of its grant agreement with NTIA, revise its classification so that they accurately reflect the work being done. And that's consistent with our rules. It's going to promote broadband deployment with the state by lowering labor costs. And that's going to pay dividends not just for the BEAD program, but for broadband deployment across Pennsylvania.
Congratulations. That's amazing. So yeah, on the screen time topic,
Yes.
to close us out.
Yeah.
So you held a December 10th listening session. You were talking about wanting to understand the ed tech marketplace and procurement decisions, commercial incentives. What concerns do you have, kind of how the ed tech companies are driving decision making in this area?
Well, thank you. And thank you for participating in our listening session. I found your comments really quite interesting and thoughtful. But this is an issue that's really near and dear to my heart, both as somebody who works in tech and telecom policy and as a mom of 6. I think that when you speak to parents these days, particularly of school-aged kids, and this has been my experience, there's just this perception that kids' curricula are being increasingly driven by educational technology and screen use throughout the school day and in homework, and in ways that sometimes you have to question, is this really helping my child pedagogically? How is it affecting their development? There's just this sense of powerlessness among parents. Socially, so much of life revolves around a screen. School isn't a haven for that. They're on screens all day between their social lives as well as their academic lives. I've really thought about this a long time as a policymaker. I've been interested in how federal policy affects these trends. What's the market for educational technology? Just understanding the trends that have led to so much screen time and internet use in school. It seems like part of it was fueled by the pandemic, but a lot of those trends have stayed. In my own life, I think a lot about the opportunity costs of so much time, so much of kids' lives spent online. My own son got in trouble last week in class because he was on his laptop during school and he was looking something up that didn't have anything to do with the lesson plan, and he got punished. And you think to yourself, like, okay, of course I don't want my child doing something that's not appropriate or they're not following directions in class. But on the other hand, you're giving this distracting, addictive machine to a child. And so it's important to ask, are they ready for this? And what are the consequences of this? I've heard educational technology advocates respond, well, we have this technology that allows a teacher to see all the screens of all the kids. That's how my son was discovered. But then you think, well, what's the opportunity cost of the teacher having to look at every kid's screen during class? Is that time that's being taken away from teaching? So these are all things I think about as a mom and as somebody who works in public policy. We've started this initiative. We had this great listening session last fall, and it really brought people to the table to start thinking about this issue. I think that our work really starts with listening and getting a survey of the market and of the trends that are fueling these phenomena. And yeah, really looking forward to our continued work on this topic.
I appreciate the work that you're doing, using your position as a bully pulpit to ask these important questions. I think they too often go assumed rather than investigated. And so to the extent that you're shining a spotlight on asking really important questions, I appreciate it. This is an ambitious agenda. I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Administrator Roth for sharing her time with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. You mentioned that you have a goal of getting to approval of 50 states for the BEAD funding. I'm curious how that meshes up with the AI executive order that seems to anticipate that at least some states are coming out with AI laws, have come out with AI laws that might disqualify them for that funding.
Okay, thank you. So we are working full steam ahead to get all 56 states approved for the deployment part of their BEAD agendas to ensure universal connectivity nationwide, and that's what we're fully on track to accomplish. And today I announced that we had gotten the number to 50. I'm really proud of that accomplishment. At the same time, the president issued an executive order that I think you referenced on AI laws and tasked NTIA with identifying those AI laws that you referenced. We're working on that report as well, but it pertains to the BEAD savings that we're really proud of. And so they're two separate issues, but we're looking forward to completing our taskings under that executive order as well.
I can't imagine it's easy to balance these two competing initiatives, but I'm really glad they're in your hands.
Thank you.
Thank you.